chapter 10 of the book of Daniel. For some reason, this chapter begins in the third year of Cyrus. But the next chapter begins in the first year of Cyrus. So the time this was apparently written after chapter 11, as far as what it says here in the time of Cyrus. I don't have an explanation, but all I know is that's what it says. Then it says in the third trito, a tri, we have the word for three. Third year of Cyrus, Vasileos person. The word was uncovered to Daniel, of whom the name was called Baltasar, that's his Greek name, and Belteshazzar, and the word is true. And great ability and understanding was given to him in the apparition. So here we have a narrator writing this about Daniel and telling us that great ability and understanding was given to him. And then it continues now in the first person with Daniel in chapter 2. In those days, ago, Daniel, I was mourning 3 periods of 7 days. That would be 21 days. Now here, the ebdomas, the periods of 7, it says days, where in the last chapter it just had periods of 7s. So you could use it either way. Here it says imeron, days, so that means that the last one was of days, or the lack of the imeron in chapter 9 means that it was another period, different type of period of 7s. Either way could be argued. Of desirable bread I ate not, and meat and enos, wine, vino, comes from that, did not go into my stoma. And with an anointing I anointed not until the fullness of the 3 periods of 7 of days. So this is what he also did in the last chapter, 9 of mourning. So he's continuing this. Now, if this is actually after 11, the mourning is all the things that are going on, and it basically, chapter 11 is all about the end of the times. It mentions it like 7 times. This is the end of days. On the 24th day, 24th day of the first month, that to us would be January, the 24th, but to them it was a different probably calendar. Even I was next to the great river. It is the Tigris, the Tigris as we call it. The Tigris and Euphrates were right next to each other. In fact, they merged together in southern Iraq by Babylon. And Babylon, I believe, was between them. And so he is by the great river Tigris. And I lifted my eyes and ophthalmos and looked, and behold, a man, one being clothed with linen clothes, and his loin being girded in gold of Uphaz. Well, that could be almost anybody. And his body was tharsis stone. Well, now that's different. His body was tharsis stone, and I'm not sure what tharsis stone was, but it must have been some type of a bright stone. And his face as the sight of lightning. Well, now it gets different. This is not a normal human being because they don't have face as a sight of lightning. And his eyes as lamps of pyros, fire. We have pyre, pyromaniac, fire, a person that burns things down. And his arms and his legs, skelly, we have a skeleton, comes from that, whereas the sight of brass shining, halku, and the phone comes from that, a sound of his words as the sound of a multitude. So this was a ethereal being, wasn't somebody from the earth. And in Revelation 1, 12 and 13, it says, and having turned, I beheld 7, that is John, beheld 7 golden lampstands, and in the midst of the lampstands, one like unto Son of Man, being clothed with a foot-length robe, and being girded to the breast with a golden belt. Well, now, what he saw here is similar, but the belt was around his loin, waist, and Daniel, and here it's on his chest. And then in 2:18 it says, "And thus says the Son of Man, the one having his eyes as a flame of fire and his feet likened to fine brass." Now, there we are. We have almost identical sign in Revelation 2:18. So he saw, I believe, Jesus. "And I, Daniel, alone beheld the apparition, Aptasia. And the men with me beheld not the apparition, but a great change of state fell upon them, and they fled in fear." Where is this seen? Another place in the Bible that you can think of? Well, when Paul went to the road to Damascus, it says, "But the men journeying," he saw Jesus appeared to him, "but the men journeying with him stood dumb, hearing indeed the sound, but viewing no one." So they heard something, but they didn't understand it, and they didn't see anybody. And then in 22:6 of Revelation, we'll go to the New Testament here, and it says, "And it happened to me, going and approaching to Damascus, around midday, suddenly from out of the heaven flashed about a light, a fit amount around me, and I fell unto the ground and heard a voice saying to me, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? And I answered, Who are you, O Lord? And he said to me, I'm Jesus the Nazarene, whom you persecute. And the ones being with me indeed saw a light and became thrown into fear, but they heard not the voice of the one speaking to me. That is, they didn't understand it. And it says earlier that they did hear a sound. So the way I take it is that they heard a sound, but they didn't understand the things that were being spoken. And so it's a very similar thing that here has happened to Daniel. And I was left behind alone, mono, single one, alone, and beheld this megala aptasia, this great apparition, and there was not left in me strength, and my glory converted. He fell on the ground, I think it says here later, and he lost the strength that he had. When you're in front of God, what can you do? The Creator, and we are so far below, and realizing what we are is like, it's almost like you give up. There's nothing you can't communicate or anything with this creation and this thing that's going on. It's so much greater, and so he was in a bad shape there, but into corruption, and realizing that he's just a human, flesh and blood, and just a little bit higher than an animal, not much. And I held not strength. So he was in bad physical shape. And acoustics comes from that. I heard the phoneme, a phone, of his logon. And in my acouse, the sound of his discourses, hearing the words, I was being vexed, and my face was upon the ground. So this being was speaking, and he was vexed. I'm not exactly sure what vexed, troubled, and he was on the ground with his face down on the ground with this higher power that was communicating or beginning to communicate with him. And behold, a hand here, a chiropractor here, was touching me and raised me upon my knees and the palms of my hands. So he was apparently flat on the ground with his face on it, and now, after being touched by, I believe it was Jesus, it raised him upon his knees and the palms of his hands. So he's like on all four. And he said to me, Daniel, man desired, perceive by the words which I speak to you, and stand at your position. In the imperative there, stand at your position. Get up and listen to what I have to say. You're a man desired. Oh, that we could all be a man or a woman desired by God, that God would want to communicate with us, and that he would give us a perception of the things which he does to understand him. And it's a wonderful thing when God desires somebody. The opposite would be when he sends a person into outer darkness and doesn't want anything to do with them. Boy, the rejection, I can't imagine what a person would feel like if he was rejected by God. For now I am sent to you, and in his speaking to me this word, I rose up trembling. And so he's still shaking, and he's really shooken up about this whole thing, just like probably Paul was on the road to Damascus. And he said to me, "Fear not, Daniel," phovu, a fear, phobia. "Fear not, Daniel," in the imperative, "for from the first day of which you gave your heart," cardian, cardiac, "to perceive and to afflict yourself before the Lord your God," which he did by wearing the sackcloth, ashes, and all these things, and fasting, "your words were heard." So it's wonderful to know that God does hear our words. A lot of times we don't necessarily think he does. Things that we want don't seem to be happening, or sometimes the opposite. But God does hear our words, I believe, and he has the solution, but he lets us go through a lot of things for his purpose. "And I came because of your words." And now he says, and brings in this other being. "And the ruler of the kingdom of the Persians stood right opposite me 20 days and 1 day." Now, was this at that time where the Persians stood right opposite him? Or is this at the end times? I believe it's the end times. I believe this whole thing is all about the end times. Persia, the only reason you would think that it wasn't is because the Persians took over the Medes, and the Persians took over the kingdom, and it was close to the time of Daniel. So therefore, this is what he's talking about, and why would it be 2,000 years later? That would be natural, except the Persians are the country of Iran. They're still there. They speak Persis, the language of the Persians. And so who's to say that somehow at the end that this entity of the Persians will not have something to do with the things of God and that are mentioned in the book of Revelation and so forth. And he says, "And behold, Michael, one of the rulers of the ones foremost, came to help me, and I left him there with the ruler of the kingdom of the Persians." Michael, in Revelation 12:7, the other place that Michael is mentioned, it says, "And there was war in the heaven, Michael and his angels to wage war with the dragon. And the dragon waged war with his angels." So here, what's going on with the Persians will give us a hint of the beast and how he is related to earthly rule, and how Michael is an angel, and he is going to be waging war. And with the kingdom of the Persians has to do something time into the dragon. I don't know how, but I believe it's something in the future. "And I came to bring understanding to you as much as shall meet your people in the last of the days." And Daniel's people, of course, were the Jews. And he's saying now here, it has nothing to do with an in-between time. I don't believe it has anything to do with the time of Jesus, the Romans, but it has to do in the last of the days, exactly what it says. "For the vision is still for days." And he's saying it again. It's for days. It's the last of the days. So I suppose some people could say, well, we're in the last times, so therefore it could be any time in the last times, which could have been from Jesus until now and so forth. But I don't see that. I see that in the last of the days, and it mentions it like 7 times in the next chapter. "And in his speaking with me, according to these words, I put my face into the ground and was vexed." So now it's interesting how this 10th chapter is actually in time after the next chapter. So if he had heard all these other things, I could see where he was vexed, if that's the case. because he knows all these things, and it's like, wow, what's going on? I'm going to be doing 11 Nicks, and I'm vexed because it's probably the most difficult chapter in the Bible to understand, I believe. And he continues in 16, he says, "And behold, a likeness of a Son of Man touched my lips." So here he is again on the ground, and the Son of Man, who I believe was Jesus, touched his lips. Jesus spit on the ground and made mud and put it on the eyes of a man he could see. And here he's touching his lips, and I opened my mouth and I spoke. And I said to the one standing before me, "Well, O Lord, at the apparition of you, my within turned," entos, is entology, has to do with your insides, turned in me, within me. "And I had not strength when I saw you. So, and how shall your servant be able, O Lord, to speak after this, my Lord?" But Jesus touched his lips. "And I from the present shall not stand with strength in me, and there's not breath left in me." He's basically saying, how am I going to be able to do anything? There's nothing left in me. I'm completely wasted. But and proceeded and touched me, as it were, a vision of a man, and he strengthened me. So again, he's touched by Jesus, I believe, and he said to me, the man, "Fear not." Man desired again, "Irene, shalom, peace to you. Be manly and strong." And be manly, be strong. You're going to be able to do it. Encouraging him. And in his speaking with me, I strengthened. And I said, "Speak, my Lord, for you strengthened me." Oh, hallelujah. Now I can speak. And he said, "Do you know why I came to you? And now I shall return to wage war with the ruler of the Persians. And I come forth, and the ruler of the Greeks came." Now, see, you would think that, well, he's talking about Alexander the Great. But if it's in the end times, and Persia is Iran somehow, and the Greeks, I don't know how they would fit into the thing. I suppose they do, is because Greece is still around. Or the Greeks were split up into these four nations, four entities all around the Revelation. So it could have been a revelation around the Mediterranean. And so somehow this rule of the Greeks is around the Mediterranean is now coming forth. But I will announce to you the arranging in the writing of truth. And there is not one holding with me concerning these things except Michael, your ruler. Michael, a ruler of Israel, an angel or an archangel, and he is with Christ, and he is facing the dragon. Jesus faced the Satan on earth and was tempted, and so who's to say that he's not facing him in the ethereal realm? And we don't know all the things that are going on. We're just being told that this has happened. But to me, it's at the end times, because it goes in here and at this next chapter and goes into this Persia and Greece. It sounds like a continuation, but yet it starts and it says, I in the first year of Cyrus stood for might and strength. I don't know. But in the other, if you go back to 10, it's in the third year. So it seems like it's convoluted there. But I'm sure there's a reason for that. I hope you'll join us in chapter 11, which we're going to go through next, and find out about what's going to be going on in the end times. And God bless.